Hi, I'm Adam in Wales, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about these type of games that I enjoy, these modern tabletop games. Now, up until fairly recently, there was a lot often talked about distinction between different types of games, with two main groups and perhaps one other spin-off. And the two main groups were Euro games and Ameritrash games. And then we also had the Wargamers who sort of lurked in the background somewhere. Now, I'm not so sure that this distinction holds as true as it once did, and I want to show you really what the full breadth of possible gaming experiences you can have, and I think each version of modern gaming is as valid as any other. But I don't think we're any longer able to put games into one of these three brackets. Perhaps we never were, but I'm going to show you a little bit about what these different terms mean. Let's get this out of the way first. I don't know very much about war games. I haven't played many war games, and so I've stuck this in as a token sort of gesture towards the war games. This is not really a proper war game. This is an old so-called album game that I found in my dad's garage, and it's essentially based on battleships. So I'm not trying to claim that this is any sort of representative, but perhaps the aesthetic, at least, is similar to what you would expect from a war game. We're talking boards with hexes or checks, and then a whole load of little cardboard chits that you move around on the board, and tables of statistics and all this sort of thing. Fairly dry stuff, but people really get into it. It's perhaps a niche within the hobby, but it's the one that's been around for a long time, and you can see the age of this box. I'm sorry I don't have something better to show as an example of a war game than Superiority. We then have the Euro games that really came with Settlers of Catan in the late 90s, really came to the forefront. These are games that are based on with very little luck, a lot of strategy, lots of meaningful choices. You'll keep hearing that term, meaningful choices, when we're talking about Euro games. Players don't really want to have too much conflict with each other in a Euro game. In fact, some games have very little interaction between the players at all. The games are fairly short, players aren't generally eliminated. And look at this box. I mean, there's an aesthetic to a Euro game. These sort of dry, historical looking paintings, often with bored looking people on the covers. What's that about? Why do we have this sort of aesthetic? I guess it's about proving in the late 90s and the early 2000s that these games are for adults. These are not children's items. They're for adults to have a serious time together. And I think we've loosened up a little bit over recent years, which is part of why this distinction is breaking down. The other big group, this isn't quite as old a game as Princess of Florence. This has only been out for the last couple of years, but this is Star Wars Imperial Assault. Perhaps the king of the Ameritrash games right now. This is a miniatures-based game, so we've got all these little plastic miniatures that move around on a board, lots of rolling of dice. It's all based around fighting and story, telling great stories, or at least the game tells us a story. So this is an example of an Ameritrash game, so called, and that term Ameritrash is apparently not intended to be in any way pejorative. It's not intended to criticise the genre, although I'm sure many people use it in that way. And so some people are trying to reclaim the word and use it more. Other people are trying to change the word. Essentially what we're talking about is games that come from the American style of gaming. And these are heavily thematic sort of games. To show you how diverse a group of games we're talking about when we talk about Euro games, I'm first showing you Princess of Florence with its old, fairly historical sort of aesthetic. It's a fantastic game of auctions, but we have many other styles of games. This is a worker placement game, Agricola, a game all about building a farm, and you send out workers, which are little wooden discs, to go and collect certain resources and bring them back. Now, when you place that disc, other people then can't gather that resource, so you're blocking off other players. Many Euro games use this sort of worker placement mechanic. When I talk about mechanics, what I mean is the way that the game functions. Okay, this is similar to a worker placement game, Trois. Now, Trois, we're moving away from that that fairly sort of boring looking aesthetic. Now, this is a very sort of bold design choice, I suppose, to use this sort of tapestry-like artwork. This is a dice placement game, similar to a worker placement game, except instead of wooden discs, we now use dice as our workers, and so we roll them, and depending on the result we get when we place them to take a certain action, that's going to be different based on the result that we've got on the dice. So Twat is a very good example of that. And then, as you see here, this is a slightly more modern Euro game, Augustus, and suddenly we're getting these bright colours and we're moving away. We've still got that historical sort of theme, but the artwork is much, much more inviting. This is a set collection game, quite a simple strategy game. You can see in the bottom corner here that it plays in around 30 minutes. Very, very straightforward sort of game. Very, very accessible for all players. So Euro games are starting to lighten up at this point. Over here, Takenoko, another example of a light strategy Euro game. Again, about set collection, but this time about fulfilling certain objectives, having hidden objectives in your hand, which you then try and complete. So everybody knows what they're working towards. In this game, there is a little bit of interaction between the players. Sometimes players can get in each other's way, but it's usually not deliberate because those objectives are hidden. So people don't know that they're accidentally sort of blocking you from doing what you want to do. So it never gets mean-spirited. If we move on behind Takenoko, we have Tikal. Tikal is an action point allowance game, and what that means is on your turn you have a certain number of action points that you can use, and you can use them to do all sorts of different things. So you have a ton of different options. If we have a look at the back of Tikal, you can see that we've got this beautiful map that forms as we place these tiles around, and these temples sort of start to arise, and we're going to move around these tiles and try and claim different areas. So this is an area control game, and the classic area control game is El Grande. This is the one that really brought it to the fore. Again, this is an older game, so we're back to that old historical sort of aesthetic. El Grande is a classic game of trying to, when I talk about area control, what I mean is trying to get more of my counters in a particular area of the board than somebody else's, and then scoring points based on having the majority of the counters in that area. So these are examples of Euro games, but it shows how diverse a range of games and mechanics we have within that genre. Euro games don't have to be all heavyweight, boring sort of experiences for very intellectual sort of players. Okay, there is a light side to all of this. These are called the light strategy games. They're often called gateway games because they're described as the gateway that gets people into gaming. Now, I'm not sure that gateway games is the correct term. I think it's a slight misnomer because I think any game can be a gateway into gaming, and it depends on the personality of the individual. If someone's enthusiastic and got the right mindset, they can get straight into a heavy strategy game without any sort of introductory stages. Other players, their gateway games are going to be a very simple dice game or a party game or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Euro game. It might be something more Ameritrash, more thematic. But here are examples of light strategy games that usually play in a fairly short time span and are accessible for any players really, or families. Origin. This is a lesser known example with a beautiful aesthetic, lovely artwork, great pieces. You know, this is a simple game, family sort of weight game, light strategy, accessible for everybody. Kingdom Builder is it's a game where you're claiming areas of the board, similar to an area control game, but in a very simple style. Lots of variety in the gameplay here as we place things around this map, and the board is variable. We can change up the different tiles, so every map's different. The objectives on each game are different. Lots of variety in Kingdom Builder. Potion Explosion is a very new game. This one has a weird contraption full of marbles, and we're pulling marbles off and allowing others to bump together to claim them. And essentially what we're doing is set collecting in order to complete these potions in order to score points. And then here's Ticket to Ride. This is the 10th anniversary edition, which is a particularly beautiful edition of Ticket to Ride. I've recently started to really involve myself with Ticket to Ride, to try out different variants, different maps that are available for it, and try and get the different experiences out of it. And I've realised quite how much there is to explore within this simple game, where the rules can be explained on 2 sides of A4 rulebook. So simple, and yet such great experiences that come from that. Having mentioned tile-laying games when I talked about Carcassonne, I should show you some more examples of those. They take all sorts of different forms, tile-laying games. Within Carcassonne itself, there are multiple different versions of the game. This one, Carcassonne South Seas, is one of my favourites. But there's many, many different versions and loads of expansions for the original game. Voluspa. This is one with beautiful sort of Nordic gods sort of artwork, but essentially an abstract game. No real theme in there, but we're laying, in a tile laying game, we're placing individual square tiles to form a map. And these tiles will relate to each other in some way. So the board is built as you play the game. Glenmore, each player is building their own individual map, so they have their own individual set of tiles as opposed to a big shared group that you get in many of the other games. This game being a game about building forests and herding sheep and cows and brewing whiskey. It's a great little Euro game, Glenmore. Tigris and Euphrates. Now this is sort of a bit of a masterpiece for Rainer Knizia, who's one of the most prolific, possibly the most prolific board game designer in the world. It's an older game, and it has some beautiful sort of looking board when you lay out the tiles and you build temples. This is unlike any other game that I've played. Lots of conflict actually in this game. For a Euro game, it's unusual, and quite an early Euro game as well. Yet lots of player interaction in this one. And this brings us to some of the heavier Euro games, the economic games. So Power Grid is a fantastic game of network building, lots of exchanging of money, lots of auctions. Auctions are a popular mechanic in Euro-style games. Greed Incorporated is a game of stocks and shares and watching prices rise and fall. Heavy, long, lots of mathematics, lots of money changing hands. Again, not a concept that's completely alien to people who've played Monopoly and things like that, but here we have something that's much less luck dependent, much more based on strategy and careful planning. Automobile by Martin Wallace, one of the sort of really famous game designers who makes heavyweight games. This one about manufacturing, supply and demand. And then we have slightly lighter games. Haben Good, almost a party game sort of weights, quite a light game of stocks and shares, and Mercurius, a game based on a similar sort of system. And then if we go lighter again, we have games like For Sale, which is a really simple little card game, but still with some really sort of intelligent auction sort of mechanics in there. Lots of fun. So economics is a big theme in board gaming right now. If that's all sounding a bit serious, then modern board gamers aren't averse to having a good old party game. So although the classics, Balderdash, things like that are still around, there are other games that have joined them. Modern games like Codenames, which is super hot right now, a game about giving clues to try and direct people to the correct answer. Similar sort of thing with Dixit, except here the clues are based around beautiful, creative pictures. The artistry in games like this are astounding. Concept goes along the same sort of lines as Pictionary and those sort of things, where we're trying to give clues, but this time we're not allowed to talk. We're placing tokens around a board on different icons. Spyfall is a game about bluffing and lying and trying to sort of keep your identity secret and get one past the other players. And at the back here, Cash and Guns is a much more sort of straightforward game of pointing these little polystyrene guns at each other and trying to choose who are you going to take down and who's going to get the most of this sort of shared out loot. So it's lots of funny, hilarious party games still around, still being created even to this day. So where does chess fit into all of this? Chess and drafts and checkers? Well, the truth is these are abstract strategy games, but abstract strategy games don't really look like that anymore. They look like this. This is Climbers, Die Aufsteiger from Germany. Again, an abstract puzzly type game, only with this sort of nominal theme of climbing up these blocks. They look like this, which is Haruichiban, which is a fairly new game from Bruno Catala. It's similar to a sort of Connect 4, but with much more going on and clever interactions and this beautiful board. A lot of Gigamics games look like this, lovely wooden pieces, nice and thick and tactile. And this game over here from Blue Orange, which is called Goblet, which again is a sort of variant on Connect 4, except that pieces can climb on top of other pieces to hide things, so there's a memory element to it as pieces are moved to reveal what's underneath. You can see we've come so far from the definition of Ameritrash games and Euro games, and we haven't yet even mentioned storytelling games, or cooperative games where people play together as a team, or deduction games where players are trying to work out the identity of a player or solve a puzzle. We haven't talked about stacking games where we're building up blocks and hoping things don't fall over, or the other type of dexterity game, a flicking game like Catacombs or Crokinole. We haven't talked about strange little German games like Hick Hack and Gackelwhack, a series of family games from Zock zum Spielen like Leg Los and Auf Teufel komm raus, or this similar company Norris, who makes wonderful games like Mops Royal and this one which is upside down but is Castro. These are family games that are intelligent and beautifully designed with lovely tactile pieces and blow old-fashioned traditional family games out of the water. So I hope this brief overview of the different diverse types of board games that are available right now is helpful to you in some way, is entertaining for you. These games are, the vast majority of these are available easily. You just get on Amazon, or you get down to ideally to your local game shop. There should be game shops in most cities around the world now, but even if not, then you can very easily get these games online. They're not hard to come by, and yet most people don't even know that they exist. And I haven't even yet touched on dice games and card games, which are a whole other world in themselves and things that I'll be coming back to in future episodes. So thanks very much for watching. All the best.